Hey guys, Chairman here, continuing with our series of upgrading Hololive TDs using budget options from the booster pack. Today we'll be looking at the second generation TD featuring Subaru, Shion, Ayame, Aqua, and Choco. Let's get straight into the deck. Here we have the entire contents of the TD laid out. Once again, I'd like to point out the ratios are quite good for this TD. We have 4 copies of our Brainstorm as well as 4 copies of a strong level 0 beater, 4 copies of our level 1 Climax combo with a pretty solid secondary attacker at level 1, 4 copies of a level 2 beater to give us a plan at level 2, which is good. I'm still kind of curious why the Generation 0 TD had 4 copies of the back row. It just seems kind of strange to me. And 2 copies each of our level 3 finishers or endgame cards. The climax spread in this deck is really good. We have a solid salvage trigger and also a salvage climax trigger here. As for standout cards from this deck, I think the card that everybody will be looking at is this 00 Aqua. This 00 Aqua has a pretty unique effect where she can, when she's placed from hand to the field, if your clock is 1 or lower, you can choose one of your rested characters or one of your other Hololive characters and stand it. That seems kind of strange, but we'll go into some of the synergies with this card later. For now, just know that it allows you to recycle some of your effects that require you to tap another character. For example, effects like Brainstorm, which are not once per turn, and it just requires you to rest a character. By using the Aqua, not only are you able to get the top check effect off, but you're also able to restand a Brainstorm and use that Brainstorm effect again, which makes it very, very powerful in that regard. Outside of the 00 Aqua, we also have the 3-2 Choco, which is a solid healer with a secondary finishing effect with the on attack. But apart from that, that's basically all the really standout cards from this trial deck. Compared to the other trial decks, this trial deck does have slightly weaker card quality in my opinion, especially since the early play condition of the 3-2 Subaru is tied with a 2-1 event, which is definitely not as good as being tied to characters or other abilities. That being said though, I still think that this deck is quite serviceable in getting its main game plan out, and it does feature a pretty strong level 1 combo, although there are some limitations that we're going to be deck building around. However, I will say that Generation 2 features some of the strongest cards in all of the Hololive set, particularly in the booster set with the yellow Subaru cards. However, most of those yellow cards require leveling blue at level 1 and potentially leveling yellow at level 2, which is kind of out of the scope of this deck as we want to level red at level 1 for our Ayame combo. That being said, let's just get straight into the deck profile with the upgrades from the booster set. The first upgrade we're going to make is we are going to add 4 copies of this 00 Aqua. This 00 Aqua is absolutely cracked. It's probably the best plussing level 0 in the entire set, and it's only a common. Not only does it allow you to pay 1 clock yourself from the waiting room, giving you the option to choose what color you need to clock, but it also allows you to reveal the next 2 cards of your deck. You can add both of them if they hit both Hololive characters, which we do run some event misses, but for the most part it should still be fairly accurate. And best of all, if you play one in the center, it is a whopping 3/5 cross turn. So not only is it gigantic on your turn, but it's also a serviceable body on your opponent's turn. If your opponent can't deal with it immediately, you just get to untap with it, swing it again until your opponent eventually decides to kill it, and then you can cash it in for a lot of pluses. So this Aqua can just single-handedly carry you through the level 0 game by herself. It's a very, very strong card. I can't believe this is a common, honestly. That's kind of ridiculous to me. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to drop the Brainstorm count by 1. This is mostly because we don't need that many copies of the draw Brainstorm, and also because we'll be running a secondary Brainstorm, which is kind of special. We will be running 2 copies of the Shion Brainstorm. Now, for the Shion Brainstorm, this is where the synergy with the 00 Aqua really comes into play. The Shion Brainstorm is a very, very powerful Brainstorm that allows you to, it has a lot of utility. Not only does it allow you to do a level swap effect by switching Generation 2 cards from your level with your waiting room, but its Brainstorm effect, which is a surge, is also Brainstorm 5 on a tap self, which means that when you use her Brainstorm, instead of milling the usual 4, you're milling 5, just like the draw Brainstorm, except instead of drawing, you get to search, which makes the Shion Brainstorm one of the best Brainstorms in the entire game, with the primary catch being sometimes she doesn't get to stand. and the time she doesn't get to stand is when your clock is 1 or less, because she fails to wake up for the stream. Due to that, the synergy with the Aqua becomes immediately apparent. Aqua allows you to stand a character if your clock is 1 or less, and Xion doesn't stand if your clock is 1 or less. So that means that on the situations where your Xion doesn't stand, you can use the Aqua to stand her, so you can use the brainstorm effect. Even if you don't stand the Xion, sometimes you can just not brainstorm a turn, and it's not too big of a downside. Generally, however, I do not think running Xion by herself as your primary brainstorm is a good idea. If you are going to run Xion, I do think a mix of Xion and some other brainstorm to help kind of fit your needs without kind of putting all your eggs in the Xion basket and having that fail you in a pinch. That being said, I think Xion Aqua is a very strong effect, or strong combo of cards that synergizes very well, and especially allows you to take very big advantage of the Aqua's effect. The next card we are going to be playing is 2 copies of the Choco 00. This Choco mills 3 and also allows us to have access to our waiting room. Given we are going to be searching with the Xion Brainstorm and getting cards from the top of our deck with the Aqua, it makes sense to also have a card that can target the waiting room. And finally, what we're going to do is we're going to take out 1 copy of the Subaru that bonds to the event. We still want to keep 1 copy of this Subaru so that we do see this event more often, but otherwise we don't really need that many copies. And we do want to trim our level 0 count down just a little bit to fit more level 1s and higher so that our Ayame combo has more targets to hit. Last but not least, I just want to point out this 00 Choco is really good anti-runner, is in a fantastic spot in the current meta. Now, moving on to level 1, we are going to still be playing 4 copies of the Ayame combo, and the Ayame combo is really good. It mills 4, gets power cross turn. It's honestly a fantastic combo. The only downside is the fact that it can only grab level 1 or higher, which means we do want to flesh out our level 1 count just a little bit more compared to other decks. Now, that being said, we are going to replace the 1-0 Subaru beater. Although this card is a pretty good offensive beater, it's not very good defensively. And instead, we're going to add 3 copies of the 1-0 Aqua Rare. Now, I only have 2 copies, unfortunately, but since I didn't pull the 3rd one, but it's just a rare and it should not be too expensive to get. This Aqua is honestly really strong. If you fulfill the experience requirement, which is level 2 or higher, she will be cross turn 6500 power, and she has an effect on your turn. If you reverse an opponent's character, she can send it to bomb deck. Now this helps her get past any kind of effects that require the character to be on the board, as well as shuffling back clean cards into your opponent's deck. Causes a lot of disruption, is really good, especially for cards that send themselves to a different zone. For example, the cards that go to memory. Aqua completely shuts it down, also shuts down stuff like Encore, so definitely a really strong effect that I think can really be taken advantage of. It's also just a really strong beater at level 1 for this deck. We will be taking out the vanillas. Unfortunately, vanillas are not very good, and we will be upping the Ayame counter count to 3. Ayame counter is basically the best card we can see off of the Ayame combo, especially since the Ayame combo is also plenty big by itself, so we can use the 1500 counter to protect the Ayame. With the Brainstorm and the Ayame, we can set up really formidable walls at level 1 for our opponent to deal with. Last but not least, we're going to add 1 copy of these Aqua 1-1 just to deal with our opponent's early play shenanigans should it come to be a problem for us. At level 2, we are going to get rid of the 2-1 beater because our main focus at level 2 is going to be getting a Subaru out on the board, because once we get a Subaru out, we can start snowballing the game. So to that effect, we will be bumping the 2-1 event count up to 3, just so we can see it more often and we don't have to rely too much on the 0-0 Subaru to grab it. That being said, we do have very few tools to naturally draw it, so when we do draw one in the mid game, it is probably good to keep it. At level 3, we will be upping our Subaru count to 4 copies. Naturally, this is the main kind of plan of our deck at level 2, as well as going into level 3. Subaru is not a good finisher, but she's actually quite a solid card to get advantage. She gets a ton of power cross turn. If you have a full board, she actually gets 4k power cross turn with her combo. She also grabs you a card from the waiting room. Usually you can do something like grab a counter to protect her even more. And she's on a pants climax combo, which means that it's pretty easy to loop her. That being said, not having any finishing capabilities does make her less of a ideal card to be running in other decks, but for the purposes of upgrading the CD, she is definitely more than sufficient. We are also going to max copies of our 3-2 Choco as our healer of choice, and also just the one card that we can actually play to kind of push a little bit more of that finishing power in game, just to do some extra instances of damage. And finally, we're going to introduce 2 other level 3 cards. Gen 2 actually has quite a few really good level 3 options. The first of which is 3-2 Ayame. Now we don't run any yellow, which means that we will not be able to play Ayame early. However, that doesn't matter because Ayame is still a fantastic card at level 3, being able to get rid of 2 of our opponent's cards on the board, really breaking board states, especially against decks like Standby or any other kinds of wall decks, getting rid of pesky cards, pesky back rows. She's just really, really strong. And additionally, the global power effect is also really good at protecting our Subarus and making them extremely big and hard for our opponents to deal with. So even though we don't have any yellow, we still have plenty of red. We can just play the Ayame at level 3. That's why we're not running that many copies of Ayame, because if we do need it, we can prioritize it and grab it with the Subaru combo at level 2 and set it up for level 3. However, it's really good to have at least one copy of the Ayame, especially in a deck like this. Last card we are going to be playing is one copy of the 3-2 Xion. Now this Xion's kind of an interesting card because the unique effect of this card is tied to its alarm. The alarm allows you to pay 1, ditch a card, and refresh your deck at the start of your main phase. Now generally speaking, this is not a very good effect because when you want to perform a refresh without taking the refresh damage, you're trying to avoid taking the refresh damage, but however, because her effect is an alarm, we do need to find a way to get her into clock, which usually implies that we have to clock her. If we're clocking her, we're still taking the damage that we're trying to mitigate through the free refresh. So it's kind of counterintuitive, however, it is still a pretty good option if we don't have milling tools. Outside of our level 1 combo, our milling isn't the best. We do have like the Aqua, Xion kind of things to get us to mill, but sometimes it's just easier to clock the Xion, the 3-2 Xion, pay 1, ditch a card, usually maybe like a climax that you don't want, and just do a free refresh. Don't worry about the deck. We do run it for her on-play effect as well, which is the ability to look at the top 3 cards of our deck, rearrange it, and then choose one of our opponent's characters to bounce it back to hand. So the combination of Xion and Ayame gives us a lot of disruption at level 3 to kind of mitigate whatever board setup our opponent may have. On a last note, if you're really interested in building a Generation 2 deck, I would highly recommend you to actually take a look at the double rares that Generation 2 has. More than any other generation, I think the Generation 2 double rares are very integral to the way the deck wants to play and how this generation wants to play. I think the deck is very focused around 3-2 Aqua as a card not only to play but also to level, especially at level 1, so that you can have not only blue for your 2-1 Xion combo, but you can also have blue to turn on your 1-0 Subaru and being able to look at the top 4 cards of your deck. So for a budget choice, I think Generation 2 is a little bit weak because you have to run slightly weaker cards, but as like a generation on its own, I think it's very, very strong. But most of the strength is baked into what running 3-2 Aqua gets you. So just kind of keep that in mind. This might be one of the groups that if you really like these characters, you might need to get the Aqua double rare to get started. And that's it for this episode for the deck upgrades. Stay tuned for the remainder of the Hololive decks. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe and let me know that this is the kind of stuff you want to see. See you guys next time.